car front seat with the Center for the Performing Arts. I'm Julia, and I'm the Director of Education and Community Engagement. You'd think I'd know my own title. Well, before we get started, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the center. We are located in Carmel, Indiana, which is just north of Indianapolis, and we have a beautiful campus with 3 different venues on it. We have the Palladium, which is our concert hall, seats about 1,600. We have the Tarkington, which is our 500-seat proscenium arch theater. And then we have the Studio Theater, which is a 200-seat black box. We also have 6 resident companies, in addition to the national and international performers we bring in. We're very fortunate to have this beautiful facility right here in our community. So first, I want to tell you a little bit more about Car Front Seat. Now, this is a program we've had going on for many years, and it's sponsored by Car Global. In a pre-COVID world, about a month or 2 before an artist was due to be at the center, we would contact the stage manager, the tour manager, and ask for permission for a small group of students to sit in on the sound check. And then they'd have Q&A with the artist, and then we'd provide dinner and tickets to the performance. Well, of course, live performances aren't happening right now. So we pivoted and decided instead to take it all online, which has opened us up to a myriad of different professionals in the performing arts. And so we're very fortunate to have such a great crew of people who have agreed to be part of Car Front Seat. Now, we've got some students that will be asking questions. And we also want to invite you who are joining us online. If you're joining us via Zoom, you'll see if you put your cursor over the bottom of your screen, that there's a little Q&A function, and you can type questions in there anytime during the presentation, and we'll try to get to those at the end after the students are finished. And if you're joining us on Facebook, just type your comment or your question in the chat, and we'll get to those as well. So without further ado, I want to tell you a little bit about David before we bring him on. David Lober is a production stage manager for Broadway and for national tours. He was born into a very theatrical family. And in fact, his parents were both performers, and they met in the Broadway cast of The Flower Drum Song. Having grown up in such a theatrical family with theater all around him, David is very passionate about it as an art form, and he feels it's very important to foster the next generation of theater goers. And so tonight is a good example of him helping to foster that love of theater. Now, as a stage manager, his goal is always to lead with calmness and efficiency, making sure the production can run as smoothly as possible. He believes the success is in good communication with the whole team, the actors, the crew, the orchestra, the management team, and the creative team. David has over 25 years of experience in stage management and has managed some of the most technically complicated popular musicals of the last 2 decades. His Broadway credits include A Christmas Carol, Groundhog Day, Matilda, and Saturday Night Fever. His West Coast productions include Wicked, The Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, Henry IV, 33 Variations, Camelot, and Caroline or Change. National tours include Dear Evan Hansen, $1 Million Quartet, The Light in the Piazza, Aida, Showboat, Sunset Boulevard, Miss Saigon, The Phantom of the Opera. And he was also the production supervisor for the North American productions of Matilda. David was the current production stage manager of the Lehman trilogy when the whole shutdown happened due to COVID. Boy, that's a huge, long resume, and it is so impressive. So David, why don't you come on and join us? And wow, we are so lucky to have you today here to talk to us more about your whole experience as a stage manager. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself before we get to the students?
Thanks, Julia. I will tell you a quick story. You actually told a lot of my resume, and it feels like I've done a lot more than I remember doing. So thank you for that. I started off in San Jose, California, working backstage at a local Civic Light Opera. And when I was 18, I moved to New York, and I did something that I will recommend nobody do right now because you can't do it anymore, is I opened the Yellow Pages up to theaters, and I started calling theaters and asking for work. That's back before email, before even fax machines and things like that. And I got two jobs out of that. And those two jobs, I can sort of trace my career, from 25 to 30 years ago, trace my career all the way from those first two jobs. So it was something that you always have to try to figure out what sets you apart from somebody else when you're looking for a job, and that was the way I thought I could find a job. And my general manager on Dear Evan Hansen, who I worked with 35 years ago, she hired me again for Dear Evan Hansen, and we've stayed in touch ever since then. As Julia was saying, we were also we were four previews into the Lehman trilogy when the shutdown happened, and our set is still at the Nederlander Theater in New York. It's a big glass set on a revolve, and it's still sitting there collecting dust. And the stage manager's office still has our stuff in it, so we're ready to go back. Now, Lehman trilogy and Christmas Carol both say that they're going to come back this coming year, and we're hoping that if everything goes right, that you'll start seeing things on Broadway in June, July, maybe the fall, but that we are going to come back in 2021. So that's very, very exciting. Julia, you said the students have some questions?
Yes, they do. We've got some great theater students who are joining us today. And first up, I'm going to ask Vanessa to join us. And Vanessa is a theater student, I believe, at Indiana Wesleyan. Vanessa, what question do you have for David tonight?
Thank you. Hello. I'm a junior at Indiana Wesleyan, and so I'm going to be graduating about a year and a half, which seems very scary. But I've been thinking about what I want to do after graduation, whether I want to go to graduate school for stage management, or do I just want to go straight into getting more experience? And I want to know your thoughts on that and the process.
I think there's an argument for either one. In fact, what I did was I went straight out of high school, straight to New York, and straight to looking for work there. But I did miss a lot of things in school that graduate school or any type of school would have helped. I wish I had taken more lighting classes and more sound classes to learn more about all of the other parts of theater that I didn't really I had to really get experience in and didn't learn it from a classroom. So I would say that you want to stage manage, you get as much experience as you possibly can. But, it really depends on where you see yourself. If you see yourself as teaching, I would say go to graduate school. If you see yourself really itching to get out and do something right away, I'd say, start to get work experience. And even if you are going to graduate school, find the opportunities to get as much experience and work with as many people as you can.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great question, and obviously something that you're thinking a lot about right now as a junior. So next up, we have Gloria, and Gloria goes to Goshen College and is a tech major with a focus in theater management. So Vanessa, what question do you have for David tonight?
Hi, yeah, I'm also a junior at Goshen College, so I'll be graduating 2022 as well. I was wondering what a mistake that you've made or the biggest risk that you've taken during your career, and 3 lessons that you've learned from it.
Well, this wasn't necessarily a mistake. Tim has some video that I wanted to play for you guys that was a very tough situation. In fact, I never thought that I would have to relive this day, but this is a video from YouTube that was that I just found out online a couple of weeks ago, and it's sort of here it is right there. It's you can re-experience one of my worst professional days along with me for a couple of minutes here. This is Groundhog Day. This is the first preview of Groundhog Day, the musical on Broadway in 2016.
We captured the true excitement of a large squirrel predicting the weather. Thanks, Tony. This is Phil Connors. So long.
Really, Phil? You want to try that again without the sarcasm?
What are you kidding? I nailed it. That's a wrap. I'll meet you at the diner.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have to stop. We're going to have to hold, please. Performers, if you can leave the stage, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're working out a technical. So that was our first preview on Broadway. We'd have 3 weeks of technical rehearsals in the theater before that, and we've been having had some problems with the turntable. Groundhog Day had 5 turntables, a large turntable, a medium-sized turntable inside of that, and 3 little turntables inside of the medium one. And we've been having some issues, but we were able to make it through our final dress rehearsals with little problems. And then during this first preview, we had to stop, and that was my voice you heard over the PA, stop about 15 minutes into the show. And we could not get the set to work again. So after about 45 minutes, the producer and the producer opened the bar, and everybody got drinks. Another about 30 minutes after that, while we were still trying to fix the set, it was decided that we were going to continue the show without the set, and we were going to do it concert style. So our first preview on Broadway on Groundhog Day was done concert style, and it was a really exciting way to go. You know, we didn't want to send people home empty-handed. So it was it was something where they took a situation, the producer and the director took a situation where it could have gone really badly and gotten a lot of bad publicity, and it turned it around, and the actors were thrilled about it. But what was going through my mind as you were seeing these words on the screen that said the inner turntable should be spinning now, or the outer turntable, whatever it said, what was going on in our head, in my headset as I was calling the show, was I was getting information from the automation operator telling me this thing is not, the turntable is not moving. There's an error. I can't get it to move. I'm communicating with the other stage managers saying we may have to stop. I'm trying to get a hold of the musical director and tell him we had to stop. Now on Groundhog Day, we had to stop the show in previews 8 times. This was the first time. And we stopped 7 times for the turntable. And the last time we stopped because Andy Carl, who played the lead, tore his ACL in the middle of a performance, and we had to stop, and he continued the show. But we got very good at stopping the show. So one of the things that I've learned is once you are in a position to stop the show, you have to make sure you tell as many people backstage what you're doing and when you're going to stop and how things are going to happen so that they can tell the actors. You have to make sure that you give the actors permission to leave the stage, and then you also have to be thinking about how are we going to restart when we're safe. How are we going to restart, and how are we going to tell the story if we're missing an element or two? So that was sort of one of my most stressful days. After you've had 5 weeks of studio rehearsal, 3 weeks of technical rehearsals, and you finally get to your first audience, and that's how it turned out. So I would say, you can try to be as prepared as you can be, and think of a lot of different things to do if something goes wrong. But you never know in live theater what could happen. So there was a little bit of sharing with you a little bit of one of my worst professional days that turned out actually fine.
Wow, my degree is in theater, and I think we all have stories to tell, from doing dinner theater or summer stock, those tech nightmares. But they always say a bad dress rehearsal, bad technical rehearsal means a good opening night. So I don't know if that's true on Broadway, but that's what we
say that as well. We were always hoping for that. We had but in this case, we had a good dress rehearsal and a bad first preview. Now, 30 previews later, after Andy Carl tore his ACL, he came back 4 days after that and opened the show, which was amazing for him to do.
Wow, that is.
Yeah. So no, I've had many times I've had to stop shows. I've had to stop Wicked, but not as much as Groundhog Day.
Wow. So Groundhog Day was just more technical.
It was technical, and we had some problems with the turntables. If they say in the theater, don't work with animals or children, and I would add, don't work with remote control turntables that get their information by Bluetooth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you do see turntables in a lot of shows. So, yeah.
Oh yeah. No, I mean a lot of turntables work flawlessly. These worked flawlessly in the in England, and then when it came over, because the inner four turntables got their information, meaning where do I go, where does the turntable go, how fast, what direction. They got all that information by Bluetooth. The outer one got it hardwired, but the inner
Oh,
one's got
wow.
it by wireless. So there was some issue. Now, what happened on that first preview is that it was a very simple thing. When everything was found out the next day, one of the casters on the turntable had gotten loose and worked its way across and jammed. So it wasn't actually anything to do with the wireless communication, but it was just something that happened, and they didn't find out till the next day.
Well, so the lesson learned is if all else fails, open the bar. That's what it sounded like to me.
Exactly.
Gloria, that's a great question. Thank you so much. I think Gloria has some more, so we may have to come back to her. But next up, we have Paris, and Paris is a high school student, and she is studying music and audio production. Paris, what question do you have for David?
Hello, my question for you today is, what is the biggest challenge you face at your job?
My biggest challenge is, well, other than Groundhog Day, which was the huge challenge, it's just coordinating, and making sure that everybody has the right information. I always find that trying to communicate with not only the actors, but the stagehands and the musicians, everybody, making sure everybody's on the same page is one of the biggest challenges. One thing on Broadway, everybody backstage is a member of a union. So the musicians are AFM, the stagehands are IA, the union, the actors and the stage managers are Actors Equity. So one of the challenges is that you have to know enough about everybody's rules that you don't wind up costing the producer a lot of money. You don't. You want to make your decisions based on all those rules. Now, for instance, the in Actors Equity, you have to give a break every 55 minutes, 5-minute break after 55 minutes, or a 10-minute break after 1 hour and 20 minutes. But that doesn't always line up with what the crew and the musicians' breaks are. That's a big challenge as well. So those are just sort of a challenge. Now there are definitely when you have something go wrong, like we just saw on Groundhog Day. But as far as a big challenge, I think it's making sure that you can just make sure that your communication is clear to everybody, and that way everything goes smoothly.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine. I know that at the center, we are very fortunate to have such a top-notch production team. And the one thing that I see in all of them, the one trait, is this ability to just maintain cool and calm. I mean, I've never seen them break a sweat, which I'm sure they are, but I think that is just such a huge part of being in the production staff, is just maintaining that calmness.
We definitely try. And I like to say that, the more calm that we remain, the more calm that everybody else can maintain,
Sure. All right, next up we have Amelia. Now, as Amelia's turning on her camera, she's a student at Taylor University, but I do want to remind folks who are joining us both on Facebook and on Zoom to get your questions ready. Go ahead and type those in. If you're on Zoom, if you put your cursor over the bottom, you'll see a little Q&A function. So go ahead now if you want and put your questions in. Same on Facebook if you're joining us. Just put your questions in the comments and we'll come to those when we get done with the students. So Amelia, what's your question?
Well, thank you again, David, for joining us. It's been really terrific to hear from you so far. My question is, when did you first feel essential to a professional production, and what steps did you take to prepare yourself for that position?
Well, I started out when I went to New York. I started out as an assistant stage manager. um, and also was a production assistant. So when I first really felt that I was essential as a production stage manager was in Long Beach at the Civic Light Opera there when I was about 23 or 24. I got an opportunity from the producer to be the production stage manager of one of the regional productions there. And I really took all the knowledge that I gained from being a production assistant and an assistant stage manager, and also asked questions of mentors that I had about how they would do things. And if I had questions during my first time that I was a production stage manager, I would ask them questions and how would you go about doing this, and taking all of their information and then making the decision. So it's these were big productions. It was a 3,000 seat theater, and at 23 I was the production stage manager of these big shows. Now I had just so much support from my producer there, Martin Wiviet, and the associate producer Keith Stava, and all the other stage managers who I had worked with up until that point.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. Let's see, next up, we have Kendra Brown. And Kendra is a student at Indiana Wesleyan University. Kendra, what's your question tonight?
Hi, I have a question. So if you could choose a skill or an attribute that everyone that you worked with, both actors and technicians, had, what would that be and why?
That's a great question. Everybody I worked with, I wish everybody I worked with would communicate clearly as I try to communicate. And one thing for actors, we always used to say, please be on time. That's something that I wish everybody would try to do, is be on time, because it's so important, especially in a professional situation where, like, if you're late for an orchestra rehearsal and you're an actor and we can't start without you, you're costing the producer money. If you are a technician and you're running late, we can't do certain things without you. So that would be the thing I would say, please be on time.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's true of any profession you're in, especially theater, but any profession is be on time. I mean, that's just, part of being professional. So we have some other questions that have come in, and then we'll come back to the students. David Pegg wants to know, when you go on national tours, what's it like when you go into a new house for the show's performance?
That's a great question. It actually is very exciting, and there are two types of national tours that I've been on, and one is a tour where the show plays where it fits, and where they've done a lot of advanced work, and you can fit your whole show in there. And then there are other shows where you play where you're booked, regardless if the show really fits there or not. And those are some of the bigger challenges when you have a show like that. And those challenges I find really kind of exciting, because that no matter what, you're going to have an opening night. And on a tour that's called, they're all called national tours now, but they used to be called bus and trucks. And you would close on a Sunday in one city, and you would open on a Tuesday in the next city. And after the crew would load out after the Sunday evening show, they would travel set to the next city, and they would start loading in on Monday night and finish loading in on Tuesday. And we'd have a show Tuesday night without having any type of rehearsal, unless there's a quick change rehearsal, because we would only travel when you see a national tour, you travel with a core group of technicians, stagehands, and a core group of musicians, unless you travel your whole band, and you pick up everybody else locally. And so that first performance, anything could happen, because you have new stagehands who are operating the fly floor and the follow spots. And there are a lot of times there are challenges that you don't find out until maybe 5 o'clock on opening night. For instance, at the Bob Carr Theater in Orlando, we didn't find out that on a show called The Light in the Piazza that our tower buildings didn't fit all the way off stage until about 5 o'clock, because there was an overhang on both sides that wouldn't allow our towers to fully move off stage. So I had to adjust the blocking. We had to adjust automation from 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock. We had to run the cast through a couple of changes. Things like that make it very exciting. At the Riverside Theater in Milwaukee, I was touring Into the Woods, and we were not able to fit Rapunzel's tower into the theater because of a space on stage left. So we had to figure out, how do we do all the Rapunzel scenes without Rapunzel's tower? And so it's things like that you really have to keep you on your toes when you're touring.
Yeah,
I hope that
I
answers
can't imagine, the different situations that come up. I know our production staff, they have to work a lot on the fly too with things coming in. Now, we don't have Broadway shows that tour, but like our director of lighting, I know he's designing a show many times on the fly as the show's going on, because the company may not have gotten there, the artists, until 4 or 5 o'clock, did a quick sound check. So he's designing on the fly as the show's going. And I just think that's, such a unique skill set to be able to adapt so quickly.
One of the other things that you make sure, hopefully, the onstage space is the same for the actors every place that you go to. That for the most part, you want to make sure that that's there, so that when they're on stage, when the actors are on stage, they don't have to adjust anything. It's only when they're off stage.
Right.
For instance, and we go through what we normally do on a Tuesday night is, after the crew has loaded the show in, the actors will come in for an 8 o'clock show about 5 o'clock, 5:30, 6 o'clock, and we'll do an orientation with them and say, here's what's different tonight. We'll do a tour, a walk around through the dressing rooms to the stage left, stage right, and then we'll do a sound check for a half an hour to an hour, and that'll give the sound mixer time to balance the house, and then we'll do the show. We'll go right into half hour.
Yeah.
Now, there are some shows that will go in and we'll do full technical rehearsals, but a lot of them don't have time to do that.
Sure.
And if there's a truck that's late, or there's snow, or there's something wrong, you have to adjust from there. We had on Dear Evan Hansen, we had to cancel 2 opening nights, one because the truck didn't get to Seattle, and one because there was a transformer caught on fire in Fort Lauderdale at 8 o'clock, and all the power went off for 4 hours.
Wow.
So you have to think on your feet there. What do you do?
Yeah. Well, we've got a couple more questions. One of them, looking down here at Facebook, I don't know if you can tell this story publicly. I know you and I have told it, and I know this person, so they know the story. But you were stage managing a production of a Shakespeare play, and I believe something happened to an audience member, and the actor, a well-known actor, had to improvise. Can you tell that story at all?
Well, we can tell this story. Oh, yeah. This was Tom Hanks in Henry IV, and we had to stop the show because of a medical emergency in the house. And this was an outside theater. Tom was playing Falstaff, and he was at the top of a hill in the back of the set, a real hill, and because this was basically a field before they brought the set in, and they brought the bleachers in. And I talked, after we'd been down about 5 minutes and the audience was getting a little squirrely, I asked my assistant stage manager, I said, do you think Tom wants to go out and entertain the audience and, tell a couple of jokes? And because Tom is very, very friendly and likes to talk to people. And I thought maybe he could just say, here's the problem, we're having this medical emergency, and, maybe he'll take some questions. And my assistant, Michelle, said he's not sure if he really wants to go out. And I said, okay, well, tell him that if he wants to, he can do that. So about 2 minutes later, the audience is starting to get up and leave and maybe go to the restroom or go out. And I hear Tom running down the hill, charging down the hill and in character for about 5-6 minutes. He is in character with the audience and as Falstaff and entertains them and does an amazing job. This you can find on YouTube as well. So
And he's just ad-libbing it all.
just
This is such an
ad-lib.
easy thing to ad-lib Shakespeare.
Ad-libbed in character for 5 or 6 minutes. We were able to get the person who was ill out of the house and to safety, and we continued the show. But again, as soon as you stop a show, you have to think, how do we start? How do we start again? How do we coordinate that? Is the curtain going to go up first and then the music starts? So you have to really think about how everything is going to happen. But it was great to have Tom come out and do that.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, so we have another question for you that came in from the audience. They want to know how you heard about the shutdown of the Lehman trilogy due to, COVID, and then how did it affect you emotionally?
Those are great questions. I heard, well, all that week we had been sort of hearing things, and that Wednesday, I believe it was a Wednesday, the 11th, which was our last performance. That was the day that, strangely enough, Tom Hanks we found out had COVID in Australia. The NBA was canceled, I believe, that day. So we were hearing all this stuff in this 3 or 4 hour period of time, and we thought, are we going to be next? And we thought, no, we'll get through the weekend at least, And then the next day, the general manager and the company manager talked to everybody, and we didn't have a show that night, and we were told we'll be down for about a month, and so that was March 12th. It was scary, it was at that time we had been hearing about COVID for about a month at that point. In fact, on the way over to London, where we were rehearsing the Lehman trilogy, I remember ordering Lysol wipes for the plane and all of that. So we were doing that at that point, and we had masks already for the plane, but not out in public at all yet. And it was scary, It's like, we never thought at all that this could happen, and that Broadway would shut down, and the industry would go away in one day like that.
Yeah, and I can remember sitting in a meeting and somebody said, "Do you think we're going to have to cancel any performances?" And in the back of my head, I'm thinking, "No." Yeah, and here we are, 9 months later. It's just crazy. So, and how are you doing this? She wants to know how you're doing, emotionally dealing with, this thing you've done for 25 years now just being gone.
I think that one thing that gives me hope is that it sounds like there's rumblings that we're going to come back in the next year. Yeah. It was very tough in the beginning. And in the beginning, again, we thought it was only going to be a month or two. And then we thought it was going to be 6 months. And then we thought maybe we'd come back for the Christmas season with Christmas Carol this year. And then we found out it's at least until June, the end of June, or end of May. And so every time it gets extended and you see it in writing, you get a little more, you feel a little more hopeless. But there's so much that people are trying to do to make sure that theater can come back. And so that gives me a lot of hope. And I've also got to spend a lot of more time with my family, with my wife and my son, who doesn't live with us, but it was back for a while. So that was great. I had more time with my family than I have in the last 20 years.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah. And, when we're doing so much online, I feel, as busy right now as when we are doing live performances. We're doing live performances, but we're streaming them live without an audience in the venue. And that's worked out really well for us. We've got a couple more questions that have come in online, but I want to get back to a couple of the students. I know Gloria had at least one more question. So Gloria, if you're still with us, do you want to turn on your camera and ask David another question?
Yeah, sure. I was wondering how you deal with burnout and how you overcome it, because that's something that I go through in cycles, and was wondering if you had any tips for that.
Well, I've overcome burnout because I've had no job for the last 9 months, so I'm ready to go. But when I'm in work, it is tough. You know, it's not only that I will have burnout, but also on a long running show, the actors will as well. And there's something called long run-itis, and we try to help everybody avoid that. But one of the things that helps me on a long running show not get bored or burnt out is working with the understudies on the show, and working especially with new understudies who are very excited, or replacements who are very excited about being in the show. Because a lot of times, at least the beginning, sometimes the beginning process for new actors or understudies is without the director, without the associate directors, and it's just the stage managers and the dance captain and the musical director putting the people into the show. So some shows, that's all there is. That's how we maintain the shows, with the musical director, the dance captain, and myself. And some other shows, the director will come in, or the associate director will come in, or the musical supervisor will come in and work with people. But that's what makes it keeps me fresh, is to work with new people, and people who are coming into the show, new understudies, people who I can help learn the show. Also, the other thing is, take some time off. You know, I have a hard time doing that too, as far as taking your days off, you know, making sure that you don't answer that many work questions on your day off, and just find something else to do that day.
Great answer. I'm not sure if any of the other students have questions, but I will. So if you do, get ready to ask those. I'll come back to each one of you. We've got a couple more questions. One wants to know, is it true that Broadway theaters have very small backstage areas?
Yes. For the most part, backstage in Broadway, you come backstage, and it is very tight quarters. The dressing rooms are smallish. They're up along like 5 flights of stairs. Sometimes there are no elevators, and you have to make the space work for you. A lot of times when you do a touring show, you actually have a bigger footprint than when you do the show in New York, because most of the touring houses have bigger backstage. A lot of touring houses have bigger backstage spaces than some of these Broadway houses, which can be very, very tight. You know.
Well,
So
they're old
yes,
buildings, right?
yeah,
Most of the Broadway theaters are quite old.
well, very much so. Yes,
Yeah.
you know, there are a couple of modern theaters, but for the most part, they've been around for years and years. In fact, I was in Mike passed away last year, but I was talking to him about the Schubert Theater in New York, and he said, you know, I was there in 1948, and I remember the dressing room was always all being on stage left, and there was tower, like 3 flights of stairs, and there was a lot of dust. And I said, yeah, Dad, the dust is still here. So it can be very tight backstage, and there can be pillars, like some theaters have pillars right upstage, and you have to work around it. And that's what's great about the designers and the production team, who will draft and will make sure that a set can fit into each theater that way in New York. Whereas on tour, you have to sort of have a generic, you know, it's you have like 30. You have to make sure you have 30 feet by 30 feet, or 60 feet by 60 feet, whatever it is, clear, and then you can go in and build your set. But on Broadway, you have to work around a lot of the theater, landscape.
So I know that our production staff, our director of production, will advance a show before it comes, and that means, you know, talk to the tour manager. What are your needs? You know, and then we also get the technical writers, so we kind of know what they need as far as floor plan, that kind of thing. Now, again, we're not doing Broadway tours in the Palladium, But do you advance a show prior to going into that house, that theater?
Oh yes, there are many different advances that happen. First of all, the production management will make sure that everybody has the right technical specs for all the theaters. They'll make sure that we're actually going to fit there. The head carpenter will do his own advance. The electrician will do their own advance. I do my own advance with the theaters, and as well, and the company managers do as well. And my sometimes we overlap with our questions are, but a lot of times we don't, and we have very specific things that we want to make sure about. I want to know about the rules, the stagehand rules, as well as if there are rehearsal spaces on site, if they're when they want their inserts or stuffers, if we're going to give them to them. A whole list of things that I will send out about 3 months before we get to the venue. And then about 2 weeks to a month beforehand, I have another email that I send out, and I'll also have conversations in the meantime, especially if there are technical issues that we know we're not going to be able to fit a piece of scenery in to this venue. If I have to restage, if I have time, and we know we're going to have to restage, I'll talk to the director beforehand. We'll get his or her advice. If we get there and there are issues and they have to restage, then I don't necessarily have the time to always talk to the director or the associate director. But we try to find out as much as we can. Also, a lot of times when you're on the road with a show, a lot of your crew has been to all the venues,
Sure.
So somebody on your crew will know about, or your stage management team will know about the venue you're going into.
Yeah, I remember when I met you a few years ago at the booking conference in New York, you knew all the theaters in Indiana. You knew Clues Hall and all those. So I guess you just kind of keep that history in your head.
You keep that history, and when you see you're going to a theater that you know is really not great, you say, maybe that's the week I should take a vacation.
Okay, well, now I want to go back to some of the other students to see if they have questions. So I'm just going to call your names real quick, students, and just check on you. I wanted to see if Vanessa, did you have another question for David?
Sure, I thought of one. When you are learning your new cues for a show, or to call the cues, how much time do you typically have to practice those complicated sets of cues that you have to call?
It depends on if you're taking over a show or whether you're creating the show from rehearsals. If you're taking over a show, or you're learning to call a show as an assistant stage manager, you get a good amount of time, hopefully, to go over the cues with somebody, or with, for instance, when I learned to call the Phantom of the Opera, I was able to go over the show with the production stage manager. I was the assistant stage manager on one of the touring productions, and I was able to spend as much time as I needed to get ready for that. And what I do with my assistants is I make sure that I go over the show with them before they call the show, make sure they know where the cues are, make sure they know what the cues are supposed to do. And then I say, go on, do your homework and come back, and then call the show for me in a rehearsal with a videotape. And if you've done all your homework and you everything is good, then you can call the show that night. And I'll be behind them for 3 or 4 shows, making sure everything is good. And that's what I do with all my assistants. But if you're creating a show, a lot of times you have an idea of where things are in rehearsal, like when sets have to move, but you don't know exactly where all the light cues are going to happen until you sit with the lighting designer and you get those cues, and you go through a process, especially on a Broadway show, of a 2 or 3 or 4 or more week rehearsal process where you go slowly through the show and build the show with all the cues that way. And then you go back and start doing run-throughs and dress rehearsals and previews.
That is so interesting. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for asking that. So Paris, do you have another question? If not, that's fine.
No, I don't have another question.
Okay, that's great. And then I want to go to Amelia and see if you have one.
Yes, I do. So this is a two-parter. What show would you be, that you haven't stage managed before, would you be most excited to stage manage for? And then which show would make you most nervous to stage manage for that you haven't stage managed for yet?
I'll tell you one of the shows that I would feel that doesn't exist. It's not running anymore, but Spider-Man the musical was one of the shows that I don't know if I would want to stage manage it. I know a lot of the stage managers are on it. It was a very, very technical show, lots of flying, lots of accidents on the show, and really nerve-wracking. But part of me would, part of me would like that challenge. What other shows would I like to stage manage? Um, I don't know. I mean, I've there's not really one out there right now that I'm thinking I'd like to work on that. I'd like to do I like to do new musicals. I like to work with directors that I worked with before and who I like, and I like to be surprised.
That's
Okay, thank you.
Great question, Amelia. Fun question. And then lastly, we have Kendra. Did you have another question, Kendra?
I did. I wanted to know, how have you seen theater both change and grow through the pandemic?
That's a good question. A lot, as Julia said, a lot of people have pivoted to do online theater, to do streaming theater. One of the directors that I work with a lot, Matthew Warchus, who is the artistic director of the Old Vic Theatre in London, and he has pivoted to doing something called in-camera performances, where it's not necessarily streaming, like you can't just go anytime and see one of his shows, but you can be part of a Zoom audience or webinar at a certain time. There are other people who've done streaming theater, and there are some people who have done a couple of shows in the summertime, live performances, but very, very with many restrictions on the audience size and how close your actors can get to close to each other. So there are also people who are doing theaters and concerts in drive-ins, which is very interesting as well, to keep people away from each other. But what we're hoping is that when we do come back, I think there'll be a new interest in filming more things so that it could stream if something like this happened again, or people can have seen that the revenue stream works out really well, and they would want to do things like this. So I think that there's been a lot of people trying to do a lot of different type of pivoting, and that some of it has been very, very interesting.
Great, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Another great question. We've had really great questions tonight. With that, I want to wrap things up, and I want to thank you so much, David, for joining us. I do want to mention the next few car front seats. We have one of these a month coming up through May. And in January, we have a friend of yours, David Jane Fitch. She is a Broadway actress, musician, and I know she does some narration and voiceover work. So that'll be January 25th. February 22nd, we have Maggie Poletti-Stiggers. Now, Maggie's interesting. She is also an actor, but she's also an award-winning comedy writer, and she actually has a show running right now on Amazon Prime that she writes, stars in, and produces. So that'll be February 22nd. And then in March, we have Adam Ohlendorf, who's a country music musician, but he's also a songwriter, and he has performed with just a slew of great country music artists. And then he's written songs for so many as well. So that'll be in March. And then in April, we have Dan Kemmer, who is a talent buyer and has worked for Live Nation for many years. So, we've got some performers, and then we've got some different types of performing arts professionals. So we hope you all will join us for some of those. We have all kinds of wonderful experiences too. We've got Jazz Talk tomorrow night, which is a wonderful jazz talk show live from the Palladium. So we hope you join us tomorrow night for that. Right now, I would love to bring all the students back. If you could turn on your cameras. There they are. There's everyone. And let's give a big round of applause to David.
Thank you guys for some great questions today. Those were really, really wonderful.
And thank you so much, David, for joining us. And I sure hope things get back up and going and you get touring or New York or LA soon doing a show.
Me too.
Yeah. All right. Good night, everybody, and good luck, students. Bye-bye.